It was the winter of 2013 when I took a solo photography trip through Algonquin Provincial Park. I had planned it for months. I needed new work. My freelance jobs had dried up, and I wanted images that looked untouched. Snow-covered lakes, pines bent under weight, that clean silence that only exists in winter forests. I told people I wanted solitude. The truth was I wanted distance from everything that felt stalled. I parked at an access point that was still open, signed the registry, and snowshoed in with a pack that felt heavier with every step. Camera gear, food, fuel, tent, sleeping bag rated well below freezing. I knew what I was doing. I had camped alone before. Winter changes the math, but I respected that. I checked the weather twice before leaving. Clear skies, cold nights, no storms forecast. The trail disappeared quickly. Snow softened edges and swallowed markers. I navigated by map and compass, following frozen ground toward Lake Opiongo. The lake was a wide, white plain when I reached it, wind-scoured in places, drifted in others. I stayed near the treeline. Ice groaned far out on the surface, low and slow, like distant thunder. I felt small but calm. I pitched my tent before sunset, tucked among spruce to block wind. The light faded fast. I took photos until my fingers stiffened. Long exposures, blue shadows, my breath fogging the lens. I cooked a simple meal, cleaned everything, hung food in a bag from a branch farther back than usual. I stamped down snow around the site, a habit from tracking classes. I wanted to see what moved through during the night. By 9, the cold pressed in hard. The sky was clear and sharp with stars. No clouds, no moon. I crawled into my sleeping bag, wearing layers I kept dry for night. I turned off my headlamp and let the dark settle. The forest felt sealed. No wind through branches. No distant calls. The silence had weight. I slept in pieces. Cold wakes you. Every shift breaks the seal of warmth. I checked my watch when I woke the last time. The green digits read 2:37 a.m. I heard a crunch. Not the soft patter of snow falling from a branch. Not the quick, light taps of a squirrel. This was slow and heavy. Each step pressed snow down with intent. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It came from the direction of the fire pit. My first thought was a moose. They move through camps, especially in winter, drawn to salt and food smells. I stayed still and listened. Moose are big, but their steps have a rolling rhythm. This was uneven. The pauses were wrong. Too long. Like whatever it was had to decide where to put its weight. I slid my hand to the zipper and eased it down a few inches. Cold air spilled in. I could smell it, sharp and clean. The sound stopped. I waited. My breath sounded loud inside my hood. I slowed it, counted. The silence stretched. My eyes adjusted enough to separate shapes. Trees as darker lines. Snow as a pale floor. Nothing moved. Another step came, closer. Then another. I pushed the zipper a bit more and leaned forward until my face was just inside the opening. The air felt charged. My skin prickled. There was a shape near the treeline. It stood taller than a person, but not wide. Too thin. The shoulders sloped forward. The limbs hung long. It moved its head in small arcs, like it was testing the air. It bent at the waist, but the angle looked wrong, too sharp, as if its spine didn't want to hold straight. I told myself it was a trick of shadow, that my eyes were filling gaps with fear. It stepped closer to the fire pit. The light from the stars caught its skin. Pale, patchy, not fur. Skin stretched tight in places, loose in others. I saw ribs. I saw the curve of a spine under flesh. It sniffed. The sound was wet and drawn out. Not the sharp huff of an animal. More deliberate, like someone trying to pull in as much scent as possible. It turned its head toward my backpack, which sat near the pit. It crouched. Its joints bent in a way that made my stomach turn. Knees forward, ankles twisted outward, feet flat on the snow. Bare. I could see toes splayed wide, long and thin gripping. Frostbite can do that. I knew that. Severe cold damages tissue. People lose parts. People adapt badly. I stayed frozen. My muscles shook from holding still. I didn't want the tent fabric to rustle. I didn't want the zipper to whisper. The shape reached for my pack. Fingers wrapped around a strap. Long fingers. Nails dark and thick. It pulled the pack closer and leaned in. Its face came into view. The mouth looked too wide because the cheeks were sunken. Teeth showed all the time. They weren't jagged the way you see in movies. They were broken, uneven, worn down to stubs in places. that made them worse. Human teeth abused by cold and hunger. The nose was red and raw. The eyes reflected faint starlight. Not glowing, just wet. I felt my body shut down. My thoughts narrowed to simple facts. Do not move. Do not make sound. If it sees you, it will react. I didn't know how. I didn't want to find out. The wind shifted. It lifted its head and turned toward the tent. Slowly, its eyes fixed on the opening. On me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it took one step closer. Snow crunched loud in the quiet. It tilted its head. The mouth opened wider. Breath steamed out in thick clouds. My vision tunneled. A ringing filled my ears. I don't remember falling back. I don't remember pulling the zipper. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, then nothing. I woke to gray light filtering through the tent walls. My body was stiff and sore. My mouth tasted like metal. I lay still and listened. The forest had sound again. Wind moving branches. A distant crack from the lake. I checked my watch. Just after 8. I sat up slowly. The tent was intact. No tears. No marks. My pack was gone. I unzipped fully and stepped out. The cold bit hard. I scanned the site. The fire pit was disturbed. Snow scraped away in places. My pack was not there. The food bag was missing from the branch. I looked at the ground. The snow told the story clearly. Prints came from the tree-line. Bare feet. No boots. The toes were long and spread wide, pressed deep. The heels barely touched. The stride was uneven. Sometimes one foot dragged. Sometimes it stepped heavy, then light. It circled the pit. It went to the tree where the food had hung. The prints beneath were deep and chaotic, as if it had jumped or climbed poorly. The tracks led away toward the lake. I followed them for a short distance, enough to see where they ended at the ice. There were marks where someone had slipped. Hands pressed into snow. Bare palms. Fingers long, nails digging. Beyond that, the wind had scoured the surface clean. I felt sick. I broke camp fast. I didn't cook. I didn't drink. I stuffed my sleeping bag and tent into my pack with shaking hands. I kept looking up, scanning trees. Every shadow felt like a threat. The hike out felt longer. The forest closed in. My breath burned my throat. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. I sat in my car with the heater blasting and waited for my hands to stop shaking enough to drive. At the ranger station, I signed out. I mentioned missing food. I said I thought someone else had been in my camp. I didn't describe the night. I didn't have the words. The ranger checked the log. No one else had permits for that area that week. No staff were out overnight. He suggested an animal. He mentioned bears, then corrected himself. Too cold. He said maybe a person passing through, someone unregistered. I drove away. In the weeks after, I tried to make sense of it. I researched cases. People living off-grid. Poachers. Lost hikers. Algonquin is vast. Winter kills fast. Frostbite deforms. Starvation changes posture. Hypothermia causes paradoxical behavior. People strip clothes. They crawl. They lose fine motor control. They move wrong. The bare feet made sense in that context. Boots lost or abandoned. Toes spreading over time for balance. Nails thickening from damage. Teeth broken from chewing frozen meat or bone. The sniffing was learned behavior. Smell travels better than sight in snow. The joint angles haunted me until I understood how cold stiffens tissue. Ligaments tighten. Muscles waste. People compensate. What looked wrong was adaptation pushed too far. I never went back to retrieve the pack. I replaced the gear. I sold other photos. I avoided winter forests. Sometimes late at night, I wake and think about that moment when the wind shifted. How close it was. How hunger narrows a person. I don't think it wanted to hurt me. I think it wanted food. I think if I had moved, if I had spoken, it would have reacted without thought. That's what frightens me most. Not the shape in the dark, but the knowledge that it was human, pushed past the point where rules apply, surviving by instinct alone. I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle the wilderness, someone comfortable with the kind of quiet and isolation that made most people nervous. I grew up in a small town in Saskatchewan, and hunting had always been a part of life, though I'd mostly accompanied my father and uncles on trips closer to home. By 2003, I was in my late 20s, fit, used to sleeping rough, and eager for a challenge. That's why I agreed to go hunting moose with my friend Adam. who had been planning a long trek into northern Saskatchewan. We wanted solitude, untracked trails, and a chance at something big, something neither of us had seen in years. The first 3 days were grueling. The north in late October is not forgiving. Snow had begun to dust the low-lying bushes and the tips of the pines, and every morning the air smelled of frozen earth and damp needles. We carried enough supplies for 5 days, though our meals were mostly jerky, granola, and coffee heated over a small stove we set up each evening. Our sleeping bags were heavy and thick, and we pitched our tent near a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen creek. The first nights were quiet in the way the wilderness can be, empty of all human sound except the occasional cracking of ice or the distant cry of a crow. On the second day, we moved further inland, following tracks that could have belonged to a moose. The tracks were deep, almost impossibly so, as though the animal had weighed more than it should. The forest grew denser, and we had to push through low branches and thick brush. I noticed a smell that was faint at first, but grew stronger as we walked. Iron, almost like blood, but stale and mixed with the scent of wet earth. I mentioned it to Adam, but he shrugged it off, saying it was probably the tracks themselves, or maybe an animal carcass somewhere upstream. Still, the smell lingered in my nostrils, making me feel slightly dizzy. By the third day, we had made camp on the edge of a small clearing. The sun barely rose above the horizon, casting long, pale shadows through the trees. We were tired, our bodies sore from hiking through dense underbrush and knee-deep snow in some places. That night, I fell asleep with a dull headache and a persistent sense that something was off, though I couldn't say what. The wind whispered through the pines in a low, uneven rhythm, like the forest itself was breathing. The shadows inside the tent seemed to move of their own accord, stretching toward me. I told myself it was just fatigue. The fourth day was colder, the air sharper, and the sky a constant gray that made everything feel flattened and muted. We had walked for hours, following a ridge, when we noticed tracks that didn't make sense. They were humanoid in shape but elongated, almost skeletal, with footprints spaced in a way that suggested the creature moved with long, deliberate strides. Adam hesitated, glancing at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, an unspoken warning. I wanted to dismiss it, but the tracks were unmistakable. They were fresh. By evening, we had made camp again near a small stand of birches. The sun was gone, leaving only the faint glow of twilight. We cooked our meal over the stove, the smell of sizzling venison mixing with the lingering iron scent in the air. I noticed Adam's hands trembling slightly, though he tried to cover it. We didn't talk much. Words seemed unnecessary, inadequate. Night came fast. I was half asleep when I heard it, Adam screaming. It was sudden, raw, and filled with terror. I jumped from my sleeping bag, heart pounding, and ran outside. The cold air hit my face, sharp and biting. In the dim light of the small campfire, I saw him pinned to the ground. At first, I thought it was some bear or a wolf, but there was nothing animal about the shape looming over him. It was humanoid, yes, but emaciated, its limbs too long, its fingers like claws, and its face, God, the face, was a nightmare of broken, jagged teeth, sharp and irregular, grinning in a way that was impossible for any human. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to pull the light from around them. I froze for a moment, heart hammering, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Adam was thrashing, trying to push it off, but he was no match. I grabbed the nearest branch, swung with everything I had, hitting the thing square in the shoulder. It let out a high, keening scream, not like any animal I've ever heard, and turned toward me. Its movement was fluid, unnatural, almost serpentine, and in that instant I realized we were in a fight for our lives. I didn't think. I ran. Adam struggled behind me, scrambling to his feet, blood dripping from scratches across his arms and face. We ran blindly through the trees, crashing through underbrush, snow and ice flying beneath our boots. I could hear it behind us, moving fast, and I could hear the crunch of bones and sticks under its long, thin legs. Every step we took was agony, lungs burning, muscles screaming, yet we didn't stop. We made it back to the truck, breathless, bleeding, shaking. I slammed the doors shut, locked them, and started the engine. Adam didn't speak. He just sat there, pale and staring straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. I could see him trembling, and I knew he had seen the same thing I had, that we had both stared into those hollow eyes and understood the meaning of fear in its purest form. We drove for hours, not looking back, until we reached a small town far from the forest. The sun was beginning to rise, turning the sky a pale orange. Adam finally spoke then, in a voice that was low, hollowed out, like he'd lost something essential. He said nothing about what happened, only that he never wanted to go back there. I didn't argue. The memory of that night, the way the thing moved, the way it stared, stayed with me in a way nothing else ever had. I quit hunting after that. I sold most of my gear, stopped going into the backcountry alone, and avoided forests where the trees were dense and shadows deep. Every winter since, I dream of those hollow eyes. The dreams are vivid. I wake in the middle of the night, sometimes with scratches along my arms and neck, though I live alone. I can still hear the rasp of its breath, the sound of those broken teeth gnashing in the dark. I never found out what it was, and I've never been able to explain it in a way that makes sense. People dismiss it as a hallucination, a trick of light, or exhaustion from cold and hunger. Maybe it was. But I remember the smell of iron in the air, the sound of the snow crunching under its long limbs, and the emptiness in its eyes. That memory is sharper than any hunting knife, more permanent than any scar. I haven't been back to northern Saskatchewan. I haven't even gone north of the towns near my home. I still follow the news of hunters and trappers, of people wandering into forests alone, but I avoid anything resembling the terrain we were in that night. The world is big, and there is room for wonder and beauty, but I know now that some places are not meant for us. There are things in the wilderness that do not belong to our understanding, and I have seen one of them. Some nights, when the wind blows through the trees outside my window, I swear I can hear it again. The high-pitched scream, the tearing of underbrush, the scraping of claws across frozen earth. I tell myself it's just the wind, just the branches moving, but I know better. I can feel the hollowness of its gaze even now. It waits in the shadows, patient, emaciated, watching. And I remember always the fear of those eyes, the certainty that there are parts of the world we are not meant to walk into, and that some horrors are not myths, they are real, and they survive beyond the reach of human understanding. I think about Adam sometimes. We speak rarely, and when we do, it is about work or mundane things. Neither of us mentions that night. Neither of us ever will. Some truths are too heavy to carry in words. They are carried in memory, in the way we flinch at shadows, in the quiet that lingers long after the fire has gone out. That night in northern Saskatchewan changed me. It taught me that fear is not just an emotion. It is a presence, tangible and relentless. And sometimes the world contains creatures that are neither animal nor human, creatures that exist just beyond our ability to comprehend, waiting for those foolish enough to wander too far into the trees. I live with that knowledge now, in the silent moments before sleep, in the chill of the first snow, in the shadows of every forest I pass. And though I am far from that place, I carry it with me. The hollow eyes are inside my mind, and I know they always will be, as real as any scar, as lasting as any wound. I survived, but only barely, and every winter, when the wind comes cold and sharp across the plains, I see them again waiting patient in the snow and shadow. I know I will never go hunting again. I know I will never return to those woods. But I cannot forget. The forest took a piece of me that night, and though I walk the world as I once did, I am changed. Fear is my companion, and memory my burden, and in every quiet moment, I feel it, the presence that waits, hollow-eyed, patient, and hungry, just beyond the edge of everything I know. I learned something essential that night, something I cannot unlearn. There are limits to what we can face, and there are places where survival is no longer enough. You can run, you can escape, you can try to forget, but memory, like the forest, has a way of following, of pressing in until it cannot be ignored. That is the legacy of northern Saskatchewan, the lesson of that hunting trip, and the reason I never hunt again. Some fears do not fade, some things do not die, and some eyes, hollow and black, will never stop watching. I went out on Lake Superior in mid-February of 1993 because I trusted routine more than sense. Ice fishing had been part of my winters since I was a kid, and by my 30s it felt like muscle memory. Pack the auger, pack the shelter, thermos, tackle box, extra gloves, rope. Check the weather twice. Tell someone where I was going. The lake was never friendly, but it was familiar. Familiarity dulls the edge that should stay sharp. That morning was calm in a way that made people careless. The kind of calm locals warned about without raising their voices. No wind, no snow, no sound beyond the low, distant pressure groans that come from a body of ice stretching and settling. The sky sat high and pale, not blue, more like worn metal. The air burned the inside of my nose. When I stepped off the access road onto the lake, the ice did not creak. It did not complain. It took my weight like stone. I chose a spot far from the clustered shacks closer to shore. I liked distance. Out there, the ice looked endless, a white sheet fading into haze. Lake Superior does not freeze evenly. Currents move under the surface. Warm water pushes up through cracks. Pressure ridges rise without warning. I knew this. Everyone who fishes that lake in winter knows this. I drilled anyway, the auger biting clean, the sound dry and final. Black water opened beneath the hole, so dark it looked thick. I cleared slush, set my line, and waited. Hours passed in small movements. I shifted my feet to keep blood moving. I poured coffee that cooled too fast. The sun slid toward the edge of the sky, flattening shadows. The calm held. No wind. No birds. The quiet felt intentional, as if the lake had decided to hold its breath. I noticed the mist first, not as a wall, but as a thinning of distance. The far ice blurred. The horizon softened. Lake Superior can make its own weather, even in winter. Warm water steaming into cold air, fog rising low and slow. I considered packing up early. Dusk brings cold fast, and fog erases landmarks. I stayed because the line had weight to it, a steady pull that promised fish. That was when I saw movement where there should not have been any. A shape on the ice, far out, crossing from my left toward the open expanse. At first I thought it was a trick of light, the way shadows stretch and fold near sunset. Then the shape resolved into a person. He walked without urgency. No shelter, no sled, no gear. Just a man on the ice, thin as a rail, shoulders hunched, arms held close to his sides. He wore dark pants and a shirt that looked too light for the cold. There was no coat, no hat. His head was bare. I could see his breath only faintly, a weak cloud that vanished at once. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Cold prickled my scalp. My hand tightened on the auger handle. People do stupid things on ice, but not like that. Not alone, not dressed like that, not moving away from shore as daylight failed. I tried to wave him down. My arm lifted and fell in a stiff arc. The distance swallowed the gesture. He did not turn. As he drew closer, details came into focus that did not fit. His steps were uneven, not slipping, not careful. His feet landed flat, as if he could not feel the ice. His gait had a sway to it, a lag between intention and motion. When he passed within 100 feet of me, his head jerked once to the side, a sharp twitch that looked mechanical. The angle caught the last of the light, and I saw his face clearly enough to understand why my stomach clenched. His jaw hung open, not relaxed, not parted. It sagged as if the muscles had given up, skin stretched tight along the hinge. His lips were cracked and pale. The skin on his cheeks had a waxy sheen, pulled thin over bone. His eyes were open but unfocused, looking past everything. Frost clung to his eyebrows. The skin at his neck was red and raw, as if he had torn at it with numb fingers. He smelled faintly of something sour carried on the cold, a smell that did not belong outside. He kept walking, past me, toward the thickening mist. I stood rooted, my mind trying to assemble a reasonable sequence of events that ended with this image making sense. Hypothermia can do strange things. People shed clothing. They wander. They lose coordination. They fixate on simple goals. I had read the reports. I had helped search parties before. Knowing that did not ease the pressure in my chest. The fog closed around him without ceremony. One step he was there, the next he was a smudge, then nothing. The sound of his boots did not linger because there were no boots. That detail hit me late. I had not heard the crunch of rubber or leather. I had heard nothing at all. The lake returned to its stillness. My line tugged once, then went slack. I packed up fast, movements jerky, gloves clumsy. I did not look back at the hole as I filled it. I did not scan the mist again. I set a straight line toward shore and followed it, counting steps, checking my compass. The fog thickened, turning the ice into a flat white plain. The pressure groans returned, deeper now, a low shifting sound under my feet that I felt more than heard. Every few steps I stopped, listening, watching for cracks that did not show themselves. When I reached the access road, my truck stood alone, a dark shape against the snowbank. Relief came late and hard. My hands shook as I loaded gear. The cold had crept into my bones without my noticing. I started the engine and sat there with the heater blasting, waiting for the feeling to come back into my fingers. That was when I saw the prints. They ran parallel to my own tracks for a short distance, then veered away toward the fog. Bare feet. The toes were splayed, skin torn. Dark spots stained the ice where blood had fallen, each mark small and precise. The edges of the prints were sharp, not drifted, which meant they were fresh. They had not been there when I arrived. I would have noticed. I always noticed. I did not follow them. I drove back to town with my jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road, the image of that slack mouth replaying itself every time I blinked. The sheriff listened later, face set, pen moving. He had heard versions of it before. People saw a man on the ice in winter. Thin, no coat, walking into fog. They gave him a name because naming things makes them easier to file away. They never found bodies. They found holes. I went back out with a search party the next day, daylight clear and brutal. The fog was gone. The ice showed its scars. Pressure ridges like frozen waves. Long cracks that hummed faintly as water moved beneath. We followed the general direction where the man had gone until the ice changed color, a darker band where current ran close to the surface. There were holes there, not round like fishing holes, but ragged, edges chewed and refrozen. Water moved through them with quiet force. A person could step onto that ice and vanish without a sound. We found clothing scattered along a line that made sense only if you understood hypothermia. A shirt stiff with frost. Pants half frozen into a shape that suggested a fall. No coat because there never had been one. The feet had been bare for a while before the end. Frostbite takes skin in layers. Blood appears late. The explanation fit together cleanly when laid out on a table. A fisherman or a drifter caught out in bad weather days earlier. Exposure setting in. Judgment failing. Paradoxical undressing. Terminal burrowing, the urge to move toward open space. The jaw slack because muscles freeze and release. The twitch because nerves misfire when starved of heat. He walked until he reached thinner ice over moving water. He broke through. The current did the rest. The lake keeps what it takes. I accepted that explanation because it accounted for every detail without leaving room for anything else. It did not erase the memory. It did not change the way the calm of that day felt staged, as if the lake had arranged itself to make a point. I still fish, but not there, not in winter. I avoid days when the air is too still. I pay attention to fog. When I drill a hole now, I watch the water closely. I do not linger at dusk. I do not mistake familiarity for safety. Sometimes, when the temperature drops fast and the lake goes quiet, I remember the bare prints beside mine and the way they turned away, purposeful even at the end. I remember how easy it was to stand and watch, to let routine hold me in place. The lake does not announce its moods. It shows them briefly and moves on. We went up in early July because one of us had a new truck and another had just quit a job he hated. It felt like a clean break. The Adirondacks sounded empty enough to disappear for a weekend without planning too hard. We picked a site near a lake after a short hike, not a deep backcountry spot, but far enough from the road that the trees closed in and the noise of the world dropped off fast. The air smelled like wet leaves and pine sap. Mosquitoes hung low and thick. The ground was soft with needles and old rot. It felt safe in that careless way you only get when you assume nothing bad can happen. We set up tents without care. Stakes went in crooked. Food stayed out longer than it should have. We stacked firewood in a messy pile. Music played from a phone balanced on a cooler. Beer cans gathered around the fire ring. We were loud, louder than we should have been, laughing too hard, pushing each other into stupid dares. Someone ran down to the water and jumped in fully dressed. Someone else threw pine cones into the fire to watch sparks jump. I remember thinking how wide the trees looked in daylight, how far apart they seemed, how much space there was between trunks. By night the woods closed that space. The fire carved a small circle out of black. Beyond it the forest pressed in tight. The lake vanished except for a faint smell and a cooler edge to the air. We kept drinking. The jokes flattened. Laughter came in bursts that ended too fast. Music stopped when the phone died. The fire settled into a steady burn. The dark felt heavier without sound to push against it. Around 1:40 in the morning, when the fire had burned down to coals and our movements slowed, I noticed the sound of steps. Not close, not loud, slow weight shifting through leaves and sticks. At first it blended with the small night noises. Squirrels and birds had gone quiet, but there were still insects and wind high in the canopy. The steps did not rush. They did not stop. They moved in a loose arc around us. We assumed another camper. That made sense. The area was popular in summer. People wandered at night. Drunk people got lost. We did not feel alert. We felt watched in the lazy way that comes from alcohol and heat. Someone yelled out into the dark without standing up. The sound died fast. The steps continued, careful to stay just beyond the reach of the firelight. The firelight reached farther than I expected, maybe 20 feet before it broke apart against trunks and brush. The steps stayed just past that line. Leaves shifted. A foot scraped rock. Something brushed against low branches. The movement was slow and steady, not circling fast, not stopping to listen. It felt measured, like whoever it was knew exactly how far the light reached. We laughed at it. Not nervous laughter at first. Loud, careless bursts meant to show we were not bothered. The sound felt big in the open dark. It bounced off trees and came back thin and broken. When the laughter ended, the steps did not change. Then the sound came back at us. It matched our laughter in shape, not in tone. It rose and fell the same way. It ended in the same uneven places. It did not sound like mocking. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to make the sound, practicing the pattern without knowing the feeling behind it. Alcohol drains fast when fear starts. My skin went tight along my arms. I stared into the trees, trying to find a shape, a color, anything that stood out. The fire made everything else move. Shadows slid and twisted. Branches swayed. The steps slowed, then stopped, then started again from a different angle. We yelled again, louder, sharper. The sound that came back was closer this time. It carried the same rise and fall again. It did not rush. It did not break into words. It stayed just outside the light. One of my friends grabbed the flashlight from the cooler. It was a cheap plastic thing, scratched and weak, but it threw a narrow beam. He stood up too fast and swayed. The beam shook across trees and ground. It caught bark and leaves, and then stopped hard. He froze. His arm locked. The light stayed fixed. His body went rigid in a way I had never seen before. His breathing went shallow. He did not lower the light. He did not move it. I followed the beam and saw a face at the edge of the trees, half in light, half gone. The skin looked pale and stretched. The mouth was open in a way that made my stomach drop. The teeth showed, but there were no lips framing them. The skin above and below pulled back, tight and smooth, like scar tissue or a healed burn. The mouth did not move. The rest of the face stayed still. The eyes reflected the light without blinking. The head tilted slightly, not curious, not aggressive, just adjusting angle. The body stayed mostly hidden by brush. The shoulders looked narrow. The chest rose and fell slow. The sound of breathing was heavier than it should have been for how still it stood. The laughter sound came again, closer now, shaped the same way as before, pushed out through that open mouth without change in expression. The sound carried wrong. It did not crack or break. It slid out smooth and flat. The beam shook. The face slipped back into shadow. Leaves moved again, slow steps retreating, not running, not crashing, just careful placement of weight away from us. We did not talk it through. No one argued. Hands moved fast. The fire got kicked apart and smothered with dirt and water without care. Tents collapsed half-folded. Gear got shoved into the truck loose. Food spilled. A cooler tipped, and cans rolled into the dark and stayed there. Keys shook. An engine struggled and then caught. We drove out with headlights cutting narrow tunnels through trees. The road felt tighter than before. Every bend seemed sharper. My hands shook against my legs. My mouth tasted like metal. No one laughed. No one looked back. We reached a ranger station later that morning, after sitting in a parking lot until the sky lightened enough to make the woods feel less close. We looked worse than we felt. Dirt streaked our arms. Smoke clung to clothes. One of us vomited into the bushes before we went inside. The ranger listened without interrupting. His face stayed neutral. He pulled up permits on a computer and scanned the area. There were no other permits within 10 miles of our site for that weekend. He told us people camp without permits sometimes. He told us intoxicated hikers wander. He told us injuries happen in the woods. He told us scars can look strange in low light. He told us laughter carries far at night and echoes bend sound. He did not tell us it was nothing. He did not tell us we imagined it. On the drive home, with daylight filling the trees and making them look wide again, I replayed the details until they hurt. The measured steps. The way the sound stayed just outside the firelight. The shape of the mouth. The stillness of the rest of the face. It fit a human frame too well to be anything else. A person with damage, with scars that pulled skin back, with a habit of staying unseen. Someone who had learned how far light reaches. Someone who listened long enough to copy sound without understanding it. The Adirondacks hold people who live off trail. Poachers, drifters, people who do not want to be found. People who watch camps to see who is drunk enough to leave food out, who falls asleep first, who keeps a knife close. We had been loud. We had announced ourselves for hours. We had made ourselves interesting. What stayed with me was not the face. It was the patience. The way it did not rush when we reacted. The way it practiced sound instead of using words. The way it stayed human enough to blend and broken enough to stop us cold. I do not camp there anymore. I do not drink in the woods. I do not assume footsteps belong to someone friendly. The forest feels wide in daylight, but I know now how easy it is for someone to stand just outside the light and wait. I never forgot what he told me before he died in 2004. My grandfather's hands were always rough, scarred from decades in the woods, and his voice carried the slow, heavy weight of someone who had seen things most people never even imagined. He said it happened back in the 1950s, when he worked as a trapper near Thunder Bay. He never mentioned it lightly, never brought it up unless we were sitting alone in the cabin, the fire low and the wind pressing against the windows, shaking the thin glass. He never used stories for entertainment. Everything he said had the texture of truth, of memory held too tightly to ever be false. He had been young then, early 20s, strong and lean from years of living off the land. That winter had been harsher than usual. Snow had fallen early, thick and heavy, and it stayed for months. Temperatures lingered well below zero. He trapped near a small, rarely traveled patch of forest, miles from the nearest logging roads. The lake froze solid by mid-December, and he depended on the snowshoes strapped to the walls of his cabin and the sleds to check his traps. There was no one around for days at a time, nothing but the wind in the pines and the occasional fox leaving prints in the powder. He liked it that way. Isolation was part of the work. It made a man self-reliant, alert. He carried a rifle, but he rarely needed it. The forest provided, and he knew it better than any stranger could. One evening, just as the sun sank behind the horizon and the sky burned with the pale orange of winter twilight, he heard noises outside the cabin. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but the sound didn't match. There was a shuffle in the snow, hesitant dragging. When he stepped outside, he saw him, a man hunched ragged, frost forming on his lashes and hair, clothes ripped and tattered. He looked like he had walked for weeks without rest. His eyes were wild, wide, almost unblinking, like someone who had stared at darkness too long. Grandpa hesitated. He could have turned him away. Most men would have. But he didn't. He knew hunger, and he knew cold. He brought him inside, lit a fire, and gave him what little food he had prepared for himself. A stew thick with roots and rabbit, bread that had lasted through the frost, coffee brewed strong. The man ate quickly, greedily. At first, it seemed normal. He was starving, and Grandpa had expected that. But then the way he chewed, the crunch that didn't belong, caught Grandpa off guard. He looked closer, leaning over the table, and realized the man's teeth were broken, jagged, some blackened at the edges. When he bit into a piece of bread, the sound was sharp, bone-grating, almost like he was chewing through something harder than dough. Grandpa froze, his hand midair, spoon clattering against the bowl. The man didn't notice. He kept eating, hunched over the table, devouring everything so fast it was frightening. Meat, roots, bread, even small bones that had been in the stew, cracked and swallowed without hesitation. The smell was metallic, coppery, heavy, and it made Grandpa's stomach churn. By nightfall, the fire had burned low. Grandpa thought the man had settled, exhausted by the food, maybe ready to sleep. But when he checked the cabin before turning in, the man was gone. No footprints leading out of the door. Just the faintest smear of blood on the wooden floor. He followed the trail, careful, knowing it might end anywhere, knowing the forest could hide almost anything. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the sound of ice cracking somewhere in the distance. Or maybe it was only the old frozen lake groaning under its own weight. The snow was disturbed in long, erratic lines, almost like the man had dragged himself, clawing over the surface. Grandpa spent the rest of the night in restless sleep, the rifle within reach, the door locked. When dawn came, he stepped outside into a white world that felt more silent than ever. He followed the trail through the trees, past the ridge where the spruce grew thick, the kind of trees that kept the wind out and trapped the shadows. He kept his eyes on the prints, noticing the jagged edges where something had torn at the snow, the dark streaks of blood freezing against the powder. Hours passed. His fingers went numb even in thick gloves. His face burned from the wind. He moved slowly, carefully, tracking, until he reached the frozen pond. It was a mirror of ice, smooth and hard, with snow drifting in little ridges across its surface. The prints ended there. And then he saw it, broken ice, jagged shards pushed outward as if something had come up from beneath. There were no more tracks, no drag marks, just the opening in the ice, dark and hollow, and the sense that whatever had been here had vanished into something larger, something silent below the surface. He spent hours there, examining the edges, throwing small stones into the hole. Nothing surfaced. No bubbles, no ripples beyond the small splashes. He finally had to leave. He never spoke to anyone about it at the time. People would have called him crazy, said he imagined it. But he didn't imagine the teeth, the way the man had eaten, the strength and desperation in every movement. He always said the forest had taken him back, that it was almost as if the land had swallowed him whole. After that winter, Grandpa rarely talked about trapping. He sold his cabin and moved closer to town. He never trusted strangers as easily after that. He always kept the rifle close, even in summer, even on the small trips to the lake or the woods that he enjoyed in old age. He told me all this when I was a boy, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, the wind cold against our faces. He said it like it was a warning, like understanding the forest meant understanding what could survive there and what could not. I carried that story in my mind for years, never forgetting the way he described the man's eyes, the way the snow had swallowed the trail, the metallic tang of blood in the cold air. Later, when I began working in wilderness conservation, I started noticing patterns. The sudden disappearances of animals, strange markings in the snow, the way the ice could give way under the weight of something no one would expect. The world is full of explanations, but sometimes the simplest answer is not the most comforting. The last time I went to Thunder Bay, I visited the old trapping grounds. The cabin was gone, only remnants of the foundation and the stone fire pit remained. The forest had reclaimed everything. I walked carefully over the frozen lake, testing the ice, listening for the groans and cracks. And for a long time, I felt like I was being watched, not by any human eyes, but by the memory of someone or something that had once moved here, starving, desperate, and then gone. The ice looked solid, the snow undisturbed, but the air carried the same weight, the same quiet tension that Grandpa described. I never found proof, nothing tangible to show anyone, but I understood why he never spoke of it again after that winter. It was a reminder that even in a world where humans make rules, where we think we can control the land, there are things that follow their own laws. Hunger, survival, instinct, and the raw, unrelenting cold. And sometimes, if you are not careful, the forest will reclaim what it wants, leaving nothing behind but broken ice and faint traces in the snow. I had been running freight long enough to trust routines more than luck. That night started like dozens before it. Reno behind me, Idaho ahead, a sealed trailer full of packaged food bound for a distribution hub that would never know my name. The route up US 95 was empty, the kind of empty that felt normal after midnight. The road cut through sage and rock, wide and black, with only my headlights and the red glow of my dash keeping me company. I had slept that afternoon, eaten before the run, checked the truck the way I always did. Nothing felt off. Fatigue stayed at the edges, controlled. I expected to roll through without stopping. About 80 miles north of Reno, the engine temperature started climbing. Not a spike, just a slow rise. I eased off the throttle. The gauge kept moving. I pulled onto the shoulder and let it idle. Steam drifted out from under the hood, thin at first, then heavier. I shut it down before it could get worse. The silence hit hard. No wind, no traffic. The road lay empty in both directions, a long strip of pale lines fading into dark. I stepped out and popped the hood. The smell of hot coolant hung thick. A hose had split along a seam, clean and ugly. I carried spare fluids, not spare hoses. I knew right then I wasn't driving anywhere. The nearest town was a long way back. Ahead, I remembered a gas station that showed up on older maps. I walked down the shoulder with my flashlight until I saw it. Closed, dark, windows boarded, pumps wrapped in yellow tape that flapped weakly. The lot was cracked and dusty, weeds pushing through. A payphone stood near the door, its receiver gone. I climbed back into the cab and tried my phone. No signal. I tried the company unit. Nothing. The radio hissed but didn't catch. I logged the breakdown on paper out of habit, though it wouldn't matter until daylight. The time read a little after 3 in the morning. I locked the doors and leaned back, telling myself to sleep. I'd dealt with breakdowns before. This was an inconvenience, not a crisis. The cold crept in slow. I kept the cab warm with residual heat and pulled my jacket tighter. The dark pressed against the glass. Without the engine, the truck felt smaller. I listened to my own breathing, the tick of cooling metal, the faint hum of power lines somewhere beyond the road. I must have drifted, because the first sound pulled me awake sharp. It came from behind me. A dry scrape, like fingernails on wood. I held still. Another scrape followed, closer, deliberate. My first thought was an animal nosing around the trailer. Coyotes worked the highways. So did feral dogs. I told myself that was all it was. The scratching moved along the trailer wall, then stopped. I waited. The night held its breath. Then the whole rig shifted. It wasn't a violent jolt. It felt like weight being added, slow and uneven, the suspension creaking as something climbed. The cab rocked slightly, enough that I felt it through the seat. My heart rate jumped. Animals could climb, but this felt wrong. The movement came from the side of the trailer, then from above, like hands finding holds. I reached for my flashlight and eased the door handle, then stopped. I listened again. The scratching resumed, now higher, closer to the front. I could hear breath, rough and wet, carried through the still air. The smell came next. Sweat, rot, something sour and human. I opened the door a crack and swept the light along the trailer. The beam caught on dirt streaks, long lines dragged upward. My hand shook. I raised the light higher. A hand gripped the edge of the trailer roof. The fingers were too long, the nails thick and yellowed, split at the ends. Skin stretched tight over bone, gray and cracked. The hand flexed, testing its hold. Then another hand appeared, and something pulled itself up. I froze. My mind searched for labels, and found none that fit clean. The shape that rose over the edge was human in structure, but ruined by neglect. The head was shaved or worn bare by exposure. The face sagged, cheeks hollowed deep, lips pulled back from teeth that showed dark at the gums. Dirt packed into every crease. The eyes looked down at me, wide and wet, reflecting my light. They were human eyes. They held hunger and fear at once, a sharp, desperate focus that locked onto me. No confusion. No animal dullness. Just need. The body followed, bones sharp under skin, ribs visible even in the dim. Clothing hung in strips, fabric stiff with grime. The thing straddled the trailer edge, breath hitching, then shifted forward, weight settling. The truck creaked again. I slammed the door and locked it, my whole body moving on instinct. The sound felt too loud. I killed the flashlight and pressed back into the seat, heart hammering. The scratching moved to the cab roof. Metal rang softly as weight shifted overhead. I could hear breathing above me now, labored, close enough that it seemed to fill the cab. I sat there rigid, counting seconds without meaning to. My thoughts ran hot and useless. I told myself not to move, not to make sound. I told myself this was a person, sick and desperate, not some story I'd ever heard. That knowledge didn't help. Something slid down the windshield, slow, leaving a smear that caught moonlight. A face pressed close to the glass, distorted by the curve. Teeth scraped lightly as a mouth opened, then closed. A hand dragged across the hood, nails clicking. The smell seeped in through the vents, thick enough to taste. Time stretched. The thing moved around the cab, testing. The door handle rattled once, then again, harder. The cab shook with the effort. I held my breath until my chest burned. The handle stopped. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the wind picking up through the weeds. Minutes passed. Maybe more. The weight shifted back toward the trailer. I heard scraping again, then the sound of something dropping to the ground. Footsteps circled the rig, slow, uneven. They stopped near the front. I didn't look. I stared at the dash, the dark shapes of gauges, the faint glow of the clock. I thought about the sealed trailer behind me, the smell of food locked inside. I thought about the blood that might already be there from some earlier moment I couldn't account for. My stomach twisted. The footsteps moved away, then returned, closer to the grill. There was a thud, then another, heavy and wet. The truck rocked slightly. I felt a jolt through the frame, like a body striking metal. The sound repeated, uneven, followed by a low noise that vibrated through the hood. I clenched my jaw until it hurt. I stayed there until the sky began to lighten. The night slowly lost its edge, shadows thinning into shapes I recognized. The sound stopped somewhere in the gray before dawn. I didn't move until I could see the road clearly through the windshield. When the tow truck finally arrived hours later, the relief came weak and delayed. I watched from the cab as the driver walked around the front of my rig. His posture changed. He crouched, then stood again, slower. He waved me out with a stiff motion. I stepped down and followed his gaze. The grill was smeared dark and tacky, blood spread across the metal in thick arcs. Bits of hair clung to it, coarse and black. The smell hit me fresh, copper and rot. The driver checked under the bumper, then the road around the truck. There were drag marks in the dirt, leading away toward the brush. The explanation that followed didn't come as words between us. It took shape in the facts laid out in daylight. The marks on the trailer matched hands, human hands worn raw. The blood pattern showed impact, repeated. The drag trail ended near a culvert choked with debris. Inside, among trash and old bedding, lay signs of someone living rough for a long time. No body, just scraps and stains, and the deep impression of hunger-driven past reason. Later reports filled in the rest. A transient population moved through that stretch of road, drawn by the closed station's shelter and the trucks that passed through. One man, off his medication, severely malnourished, had been seen weeks earlier wandering traffic, reaching for vehicles that slowed. He had survived on roadkill and whatever he could steal. He had lost weight fast. He had lost sense faster. I hadn't driven an inch that night. The blood on my grill came from his own desperate attempt to reach the food he smelled, the warmth he saw. He had thrown himself at the truck again and again, trying to get inside, trying to climb back up. The damage told the story clean. I finished the route days later, in a different truck. The company logged the incident as a breakdown with animal impact, then corrected it quietly. I kept driving. The road stayed empty most nights. When I pass that stretch now, I don't stop. I keep my eyes forward and my doors locked, and I don't think about hands on metal in the dark unless I have to. I have hunted alone since I was old enough to carry my own pack. It started as a choice and turned into a habit. I liked the quiet work of it, the way the woods demanded attention without asking for anything back. October of 2013 was dry and colder than it should have been. The Upper Peninsula had already lost most of its color, and the trees stood thin and gray, with leaf litter packed down from early frosts. Deer season had been slow. Tracks showed up each morning, but they stayed light and scattered, moving at night, cutting through swamps and old cuts that made stalking pointless. I kept pushing farther because staying close meant seeing nothing. I parked the truck before dawn on a narrow two-track that ended at a closed logging gate. Beyond it lay state land that folded into private timber holdings and back again. Maps showed old clearcuts and a creek that ran north into a chain of beaver ponds. I planned to loop wide and come back before dark, but the day slipped. The woods did not feel empty. It felt watched, not in a dramatic way, but in the way a place feels when it holds signs of use without showing the user. There were boot prints mixed with deer sign, fresh enough to matter. I noted them and kept going. By afternoon, the light flattened. The sky stayed overcast, and the sun never broke through. The trees grew closer together as I moved into older growth. Trunks rose straight and tall, with little underbrush, the ground soft with needles. Sound carried wrong in that kind of forest. A footstep could vanish. A branch crack could seem close and then far. I slowed and paid attention. I checked wind and sign. I did not feel afraid. I felt focused. Around dusk, I reached a low ridge that overlooked a shallow basin. The basin held a mix of cedar and poplar, damp ground with moss and old logs. It was a place deer crossed late, using cover until the last light. I settled against a spruce and waited. My breath came out thin and steady. Time stretched. The woods shifted as they always do at that hour. Birds went quiet. Squirrels stopped. The air cooled. Movement caught my eye to the left. At first it looked like a tree swaying, but the air was still. Then it stepped forward. It was tall, taller than any person I had seen in the woods, narrow through the shoulders, moving with a careful, slow gait. It crossed between trunks at a distance that made judging size hard, but the head sat higher than it should have. I raised my rifle without settling the stock. I watched through the scope without aiming. The shape did not rush. It did not bolt. It turned its head before I adjusted my grip. The turn was smooth and early, like it sensed me before I committed. Animals react to sound or motion. This felt time to me. I did not see a face. I saw the outline of a head and neck, and the line of a back. It paused, then shifted weight. The light was failing, and shadows filled gaps between trees. I chose not to fire at it. I fired once into the dirt a few feet ahead of my position, angled down. I expected a crack and a clean echo. The sound came back wrong. It did not roll away or snap clean. It came back broken, uneven, like a bad copy layered over itself. The woods absorbed part of it and threw the rest back in pieces. After the shot, everything stayed still. No crashing run. No panic. The tall shape did not move. Then I heard my dad's voice behind me. My dad had been dead since 1998. He taught me to hunt. He had a way of speaking in the woods that was flat and practical, meant to carry just far enough. The sound behind me had that same rhythm. It did not come from a memory. It came from space. It had direction and distance. It sat a few steps back and to the right, where the slope dipped and sound would pool. My body reacted before my mind caught up. My skin tightened. My hands went numb. I did not turn. I did not look. I did not answer. I stayed still because moving felt wrong, like it would lock me into something I could not undo. The voice came again, closer, using the same cadence. It did not call my name. It did not ask anything. It carried the weight of familiarity without the details that make it human. I understood then that something in that place was shaping sound, not in a way that broke rules, but in a way that bent them. Wind funnels do that. Hollow ground does that. People do that too. I lowered the rifle and stepped backward without looking. My heel caught on a root, and I nearly went down. The tall shape moved then, not toward me, not away, but sideways, slipping behind trunks with a speed that matched a person who knew the ground. I realized I had been watching a human on elevated ground, likely on a rise that made them seem taller, carrying something long that extended the outline. A survey pole or a ladder. The head turn made sense then. A person listening. The timing made sense. The stillness did not. The voice behind me did not match the shape ahead. That mattered. Two sources meant intent. I backed down the ridge until the trees closed in and broke sight lines. The ground dipped into wet moss. My boots soaked through. I moved fast and quiet until my lungs burned. I did not run until the light failed completely. I left everything. Rifle. Pack. Tuck. I did not circle back. I did not mark the spot. I followed the creek downhill because water always leads somewhere. I crossed old logging roads and fresh cuts that smelled of sap. At one point I heard the voice again, farther off, stretched thin, repeating the same pattern without words. It sounded mechanical then, like a recording played through air that kept shifting. I understood how my father's cadence could exist without him being there. I understood how fear could sharpen recognition and fill gaps. I reached the truck well after dark, hands shaking, boots soaked, head buzzing. I drove without turning the radio on. Sleep did not come that night. It did not come cleanly for months. 2 weeks later, a conservation officer called about the abandoned rifle. It had been found near a flagged boundary line. The officer explained the area had active timber surveys. Crews used tall poles to sight lines through trees. One crew had been using recorded human voices as a bear deterrent, played on a small speaker carried on a strap. The recording came from an old instructional tape found in a trailer, a man speaking in a flat tone about safe handling and patience. The cadence matched what many hunters of a certain era learned. Sound had bounced off a shallow sinkhole near the ridge, breaking the shot and throwing pieces back. The officer said it was a bad mix of timing, light, and nerves. He said no laws were broken. He said the woods do that sometimes. I accepted the explanation because it fit. A tall outline explained by poles and ground. A head turn explained by a person listening. A wrong echo explained by terrain. A familiar voice explained by a recording that matched patterns my mind already held. The details lined up without asking me to believe anything else. I retrieved nothing. I signed forms. I thanked him. I do not hunt anymore. Not because of fear of what I cannot explain, but because I learned how easily the woods can turn ordinary things into something personal and sharp. I learned how memory can step into space and wear a voice. I learned that solitude can fold back on itself, and bring the past forward with enough force to stop a man cold. The Upper Peninsula did not change that day. I did.